Translation of Scholarius' first work against Aquinas' essence-energies doctrine, and a defense of Gregory Palamas in 2 chapters 1. Chapter 93. If there is a composition, synthesis, in God. Armandus of Bellovisu's commentary on Aquinas' De Ente et Essentia. We are not able to suppose this composition in God. For if the essence, ousia, of God is per se also some energy, energeia tes, it is but unable at any rate to take on the notion of potency, ton tes dunameos logon. For the act of existence, to einai, does not but possess the other potencies, that is, esse and essentia, are really separate for orthodox Thomists, but this essence exists through these potencies which are really pragmatikos, all the items in God because of this combination of potencies. If someone says that the essence of God is able to be considered as if the act of an essence that receives esse, to einai lamba nusantu, and that its active existence is, as if indeed something received, just as it is in creatures, and would also constitute some kind of composition of reason, synthesin to logu, with respect to God. Yet, one needs to know that the composition of reason is true whenever something has been distinguished in re in the thing itself. Apokrinatai tn to pragmati. Just as when we assert that the essence of angel in virtue of a res pragmati, viz., what really is in relation to itself, and that there is some act, energeion, and we say that the act of existence is received by virtue of the thing, pragmati, as something distinct, diapheron, from the very essence. So, in this, the composition of reason is this, which we suppose in the angel, p. 278, holds for something in re, or the thing itself, and to pragmati. But this is not so for God. For his essence, being that it is act, energeia, does not receive the act of existence as differing from its essence. Whence there is not a composition of reason in him truly, from these items of essence and existence on this account, for the distinction has no fundamentum in rimac, in foundation, in the thing itself, and to pragmati, but is a composition by our soul, psychis, that was produced, papoimene, or formed, peplasmene. See Scholarius' commentary on Armandus. Introduction. Now, among us creatures, Armandus's Aquinas posits such a kind of differentiation, diaphora theta, out of which a composition would come about, but not in God. For we see that this kind of synthesis is in creatures, 3, as was said above, yet we, orthodox, are considering God through the path of creatures, known and real items outside the soul, and yet we say heartily that, in him, such a kind composition of reason does exist. Now, God is in every respect simple, for, applause, and he is situated in the extreme of simplicity, aplatetos. 5, about whom nonetheless it is not in the least necessary for us to say, nothing at all is distinguished in the thing itself, just because of this Armandus account. We send laud up to him by means of many names, which are invoked concerning God, but now some sort of composition is not distinguished through the composition of thought objects, noematon, in us. But for each name of the items predicated of God, something is distinguished in re'an to pragmati. So, in another manner we would be deceived, after such names were supposed, that is, following our attribution of some such kinds of names to God, namely, God is good, or that he is true, or some such item. Clearly, this is an absurdity, for it reverts back to some kind of deformity as compared to Holy Scripture and with respect to the very truth itself. 6. These aforementioned matters are expedient in regard to the sentential judgment of the doctor, Armandus. So, we speaking for ourselves, think that this rationale quite literally arises out of the theological matters below. Argument 1. Section Alpha. Firstly, it is necessary to know that God is most simple, aplostatos, 7, as was just said above, and thereby that a composition following a quantity of parts, meron, is not in him. Neither, then, is God a body, nor is he composed of matter, oulos, and form, eidos, since he is entirely immaterial, aulos, and nor is there a composition of a substrate, upokemenu, in him, section beta. For this very divine form, eidos, that is, that the Godhead, a theotes, as one underlying, aphestos, has a subject, upokemenon, and per se has this, todi, act of existence, and is individual, atomos. Whence, in no way is it different for us to believe in one Godhead and one God, but these aforesaid are all this God, 8, even if diversified by the mode of signification, to tropotes semasias. Section C. Following from the aforesaid, neither is God composed of 1, essence, and 2, nor of the act of existence, neither from 3, genus, nor 4. Difference due to the fact that some potency, dunamen, in God, may not be joined in act and energeia, the potency of whom would be consequently received from some part of a genus, as in respect to all these having the character of composed items in this aforesaid manner. Also, neither is God in a genus at all, nor is he even so per analysis, analusen, thinking that he is the principle of all beings, archi, according as some were wont to think. Yet, all the less then, is there a composite of subject and accident, for it is not at all possible that an accident exists in him, who is simply, aplos, first nine and first cause of all things. Because there are so many and great modes of composition, and since according to nobody is there such a possibility that God is thus composed, for we believe that this preoccupation of Armandus is suitably avoided regarding composition, and that God is first through his very act of existence, he is also first and universal, koinen, cause. In no way does he harmonize with the act of being composed in some way. If every composed item has a unifying cause in itself, while presuming that these items differ per se, as otherwise they would not have been possible to be brought together into a unity from themselves, then this being is further of the nature of items placed together and has been fastened together from these aforesaid items. Argument 2. Secondly, it is necessary to understand that in the case of things predicated about God, but even more so of those things attributed to the divine nature, there are items properly belonging to the first enteleki, entelekaion. 10. Section A. They are opposed to the passive potency, to pathetike duname. This is just like the act of existence. This enteleki is active, drastic. Distinction 1. Although this active enteleki is opposite to the active potency, ti drastike duname, we nevertheless suppose, too, no passive potency in God, but only suppose the aforementioned active power, drastiken dunamin. Distinction 2. Since these items belong to the active activity, drastiken energean, these have been ordered to also show theoretical activity, theoretiken energian. So, let them be called such. The theoretical activity is perfective, teleiotaike, of the same subject that possesses this activity. Such is to contemplate, to will, wisdom, and science. B. Projective power. Proactiken. This is perfective of other sorts of things. After this energy has also been divided, diairumenes, into two following items belong to those things by reason of their natural activity, te phusike energeia. I, the first, is within endon, God, as for instance begetting, genesis, and emanation, probole, whereby the divine hypostases are harmoniously projected, proagontai, from the first hypostasis according to God's very form, eidos, of his nature. Now, there are items properly belonging to the volitional power, the letiken energean. 2. The second is an energy regarding what are ad extra, ta exo, namely, an energy by which God's creatures exist. They subsist, upistantai, then they are perfected, teleiuntai, according to similitude, homoioteta. 11 of the act of the will, bouleseos, but certainly not as a similitude of the active nature. Fusios, point 1.2, gloss on B.2, supra. After this volitional energy is also divided within itself, there are things proper in relation to that energy, energion. Namely, there is the energy by means of which beings came forth from absolute non-existence into the active existence, viz., creation. There are things that properly befit that energy, energion, through which beings came forth from the fact of non-existence, ek tu time einai, into the act of existing, ais tu ti einai. Point 1.3. Now, creation would be this very thing. 1.4. Argument 3. Excursus on supposition. Accordingly, from all these names and from the name God, which arranged for signifying, semenon, the divine nature, our mind composes, synthesein, many propositions, namely, that God exists, or that God considers, or that God begets, or emanates, or creates, or such like. This grammatical composition is also invented by the soul alone and in the soul alone. For a grammatical composition is characterized by a subject and of a predicate, but a material supposition, hypothesis, and a predicate of the soul is a product intention, ergon. Point 1.5. Not in the least, because of the aforesaid intention and formed propositions with these names, do these produce any sort of composition in God. 1.6. Argument 4. Excursus on real and intentional being. On the other hand, our mind is unable to consider in a way other than this sort of subject-predicate composition, by which mode it considers other items and even considers God himself. The mind can also consider that this God is above all beings, ta onta. But in no way is it possible that the character of divine simplicity is, thus arrogantly grasped as a simple concept, with the result that it considers divine nature according to one act of direct apprehension, epibolon, as this divine nature simultaneously considers itself as one whole. Because of this also the soul composes multitudinous propositions, which are composed from real things, pragmaton. 17, which aforesaid are the things in the soul, that is, from intelligible objects, noematon, by which certain beings are doubtlessly distinguished outside of the soul, viz., real entities, in the manner that they exist in themselves, but not as they are considered by the soul, that is, beings of reason, as is the nature of second intentions. Ta deuteron epinoion. Intentional being. 1. Second, intentions. Now, on the contrary, these very same first intentions are distinguished by things, pragmasi, such as these that are in the soul. Although first intentions are not real things, pragmata, differing in God in this way, just exactly as they exist as concepts, logoi, of these aforesaid things. In the soul, that is, some whole thing, pragma, does not spring up in God under the notion, upotologo, of goodness, in such a way as it correspondingly holds in relation to God and the divine essence. Intentional being. 2. First, intentions. Thus, for instance, the concept, logos, of goodness, dwells in the human soul, as a concept predicated of the divine essence, but these attributes are thusly real things, pragmata as beings of the thing and in the thing, that is, as of that one and simplest essence having something properly in relation to all such perceptions, albeit not because of what is being perceived by us directly in this exact way, but because of having this kind of essence in this exact way, viz., with respect to the distinction of those perceptions which are in us, by which nothing at all, real, pragmaticon, is distinguished ad extra, but rather only the thing is distinguished in the soul, that is, an intelligible object, noema. Intentional being. 3. Second intentions. Or, something is not distinguished as the res is, but as something understood, noumenon, as it happens thus in the notion, on to logo, of genus and of species, and happens entirely among second intentions. Intentional being. 4. First intentions. Because of the aforementioned 2, the divine essence is considered as compared to all its own perfections, which some Franciscans were accustomed indeed to call energies. And of course this divine essence and its perfections, viz., wisdom and goodness, or paternity and sonship, or begottenness and procession, and such, are considered thusly, but they are rather one something, inasmuch as we consider something springing up and something reflecting the essence by means of the thing. Argument 5. Classes of real distinctions that exist outside the mind alone. Ens extra animam. A. Real distinction. So to say, there is a simultaneous whole whose res we already call according to a mode. For example, this stone and that man, or Gabriel, all of which are individuals, atoma, separated from one another. Or we call the soul and the body, both of which, even if they have not also been actually separated, as long as the parts are still united together, they are still possible to be separated. B. Formal distinction. Therefore, as the former mode, energies are not the former kinds of res, pragmata. Yet the form distinction is not real, pragmatike, in the relative sense, but rather all these items are one thing thusly. Now, all these res, which surely are one, as God are res, pragmata, according to some other mode, heteron, tina, tropon. So, not existing in the soul alone, as if manufactured or produced by it, these things have a certain existence outside of the soul and exist side by side with it. Maronist, formal, real distinction. Class A, modal distinction. So, hence, it logically results that the divine essence is necessarily called a res absolutely, aplos, and properly kurios, not only as a being, an s outside the soul and truly existing, for example, esse and essentia. 18. Maronist real distinction, Class B, formal distinctiona, but also as ens in the mode of an individual, for example, Father and Divine Essence, and Myronist real distinction, Class G, formal distinction, as ens of equidity, for example, Divine Essence and its attribute, and Myronist real distinction, Class D, real essential distinction, ans of something numerically one, for example, God and a creature. C. Comparison of the real essential and the formal real distinction. This might even become some term, oros, or foundation, themelios. 19 of the real distinction, cf. supra, D, between himself and another thing, pragmatos, in a like manner, just as we assert God and some creature, viz., Gabriel, to be really distinguished from one another, because in this distinction in place of certain terms and their foundations, two whole subsistent things are taken into account. 20. Verily. Now, let one dismiss what was said at this point because the aforementioned are also distinguished according to their essence, karousian, and one thing is a second greater antithesis than the other, but it satisfies present necessity that it is really, pragmatikos, distinct. 2. 1. For things that differ essentially, ausiodos diapheronta, are really much more distinguished. 22. D. Terms and reference. Certainly, one could call the divine essence a thing, but all the perfections within itself are energies, and thusly would not themselves be called things, pragmata, but would be thought of as beings of the thing and in the thing. 23. It could also be thought of as a whole together. To sumpan. There would be realia, realities, pragmatica. And from this point there is no synthesis at all in God out of these items themselves and the essence, whose aforementioned items are real, pragmatica, and true perfections. Chapter 94. On how many items are sought for a composition, synthesin. Now, the manner is not merely to be sought in which these items are many, to plio, and different diaphora, with respect to a certain act of metaphysical composition or producing something composite, syntheton, out of its own intrinsic items. Gennadius' statement of problems presented from Thomistic Armandus. Problem 1. Now, firstly, it is necessary that each of these aforesaid metaphysical items have been delimited, peperasmenon. Solution 1. The divine essence, ousia, is infinite, apeiros. 24. Problem 2. Secondly, it is necessary that each of these items should be a restopragma. Solution 2. Now, the divine energy, whether ad intra, endon, or ad extra, exo, is not kurios, a res, exactly as the divine essence, but rather there is an aliquid rei, t to pragmatos, and an aliquid in re, an to pragmati. Now, some or other indeterminate common nature, physis, is also not an individual, atomos, nature, since the divine energy is something else, posterior to the divine essence, 25, and is not capable of being separated, chorisas tai, from the divine essence. Problem 3. Thirdly, it is necessary that each of these items should be capable of being a part of something, merostinos. Solution 3. What is divine, to theon, is impartible, ameris. Problem 4. Fourthly, it is necessary that on one account of these items these be in potency, on duname, which is in relation to a future, whole, through juxtaposition, parathesi. Solution 4. Now, God is pure act, alicrines energeia, and there has not at all been mixed with himself any bit of potency, anamemic dai, viz., what is called a passive pathetics potency. Problem 5. Fifthly, it is necessary that on one account of these items there is activity, energeia, that perfects, teleusa, the future, whole. Solution 5. However, in God, nothing at all would exactly be in need of perfection, teleosios, as an incomplete being, ateleison, since all the items in God existing by means of the divine essence are, aic, activities, in virtue of a perfect mode of existence, teleo us. Problem 6. It is necessary that pure energies not also be ultimately entelekis, entelekai, and certainly not be necessary beings, ex anakis onta. Solution 6. Now, God is pure act, and the ipsum esse, to einai auton, is necessary simpliciter, aplos anagkaion. Problem 7. Yet, on one account of these items, it is necessary that these are employed in the future, whole. Solution 7. Now, the divine nature does not at all employ these due to that fact that there is not at all in God prior and posterior in gradation. Problem 8. Some other things are sought too, with respect to the fact that some composition comes about, genestai, from a greater number of diverse items, diapharenton, which same items do not harmonize with God, whether on account of the essence or on the part of the activity, or from both. Solution 8. And because of this very fact, no composite at all comes about in God from the essence and its pure act, or from the activities. Argument 1. Florentine. Debate. From the aforesaid explanation, it is clear as well what is necessary to opine also about the recently rehashed discussion among us. Ferrara, Florence, 1439. Now, it is rather obvious that our Church has opined well and justly about those not opining correctly on this subject, and banished those opining such wise about the sacred emanations, peribolon. Now, among us, some happen to suppose only, monon, a distinction of reason, 10 diacrison logo, between the divine essence and energy, energeias, that is, a conceptual distinction, epinoia, whose heretical leaders existed among Barlaam the Calabrian and the unkind Acindinos, from whose city of ours, claiming to hold up Thrace, did no aid to us, where they were divided among themselves. For in this way it was probable too that these were fighting on account of a falsity, who were inimical among themselves, while the citizens of the time were defending the common opinion on this in respect to the truth. The citizens rejected war from this very same rashness and stubbornness. From this time, Aquinas was of a much worse sort and was harder to bear, since after Barlaam's shameful flight from the contest Aquinas also showed himself conquered by pride. p. 282. Even before this, he put this together. He had taken up the war against the Church from some kind of factious ambition and became nonetheless fixed with Barlaam more than all other orthodox. Argument 2. Metaphysical logic. Accordingly, these and all associated with their heresy were speaking of the nonsensical distinction between the divine essence and energies, commonly called a distinction by reason, that is, by concept, according to whose mode all whatsoever understood objects of thought, ta ginoskomena, have been distinguished, diakakritai, by the soul, by which they are understood objects of thought, as they are also conceptualized items, noumena. And all these are second intentions, ei deuterai epinoiai, regarding which there is a logical theory among Latins. Now, doubtless, these understood objects are manufactured, tisontai, in the soul. Whence, too, the distinction by the soul has been produced, pepoimene, and exists in the soul alone. In this way were they also accustomed to assert that all the items attributed predicated, apodidomina, of the divine essence are distinguished for God, for whom these very items were asserted not really to be distinguished, but that our mind, noun, distinguishes these same items, while these conceptual items, form, platonta, terms, orus, per se, among which such a kind of distinction might be contemplated. Yet, this falsity is also impossible, for as the divine Scripture attributes these items truly to God, which predicates something to God, namely justice and wisdom and goodness, then there is said to be a just and wise and good God. And teachers of our Church also understand, nousai, certain true distinctions to be in God under these notions, logois. Thence they don't fear that they might inflict some injury to the highest unity, acra enoteti, and simplicity, aploteti, of God. 2.6. Yet, if a distinction of hypostases is not a fact, the distinction of which is really diri, pragmaton, that is, of subsistences, ephestaton, or hypostases, whose simplicity according to God's essence is not contended, so that they distinguish from every place the divine essence of each energy from those items predicated to God, regarding which energy it happens always to produce a notion, logon. So, then, they attribute also modes of distinction, the terms of which would certainly not have been produced by the soul, so that there is no distinction of reason at all. This is so, as when they distinguish these attributed items through something absolute, apolelumeno, or by not being absolute, or by a relation, anaphorico, which is with respect to itself and in respect to another, which is from something else and which is not from something else, which is participated and which is not participated, etc. All these are said as contradictories, antiphatica. Statement of purpose. It is the character of this treatise that the greater of sayings of our teachers are explained more than what is the discourse at present. Yet these dictums were laid down in his same compilation by sacred Gregory of Thessalonica, 27, who fought at that time for this very thesis of the Church and of those to whom it seemed good, having left out not a one among the ancient doctors through his wisdom and virtue and zeal. And if free time be not at hand for the lesser work from that famous thesis of sacred Gregory, for the implements of apostles were come upon him, he comes upon the thought processes, dianoian, of those teachers of yore, to gather the common opinion among them. History of the conflict. These of the party surrounding Barlaam and Aquinas promoted that some such things be held as opinion. First, they badly held that out of their active thinking, the divine essence, p. 283, and energy are distinguished between themselves in whatever way, for in the following way they were accustomed to account multiple res, pragmata, existing in God, that he would be composite, as if in him many res, pragmata encompass separated items that were united together. Therefore, fleeing from thinking the divine as a composite, they thought that this is distinguished according to reason alone, kat epinoion monen. They were thinking, too, that this teacher, whom I call Thomas Aquinas, held agreement on this opinion. Aquinas did not support that these aforesaid items be distinguished realiter, pragmatikos, but held that these items are fit to distinguish by reason, logo diaphorein. Now, famed Barlaam seemed to breathe the same air of this Thomas, even if he would have altogether despised the question of Aquinas about the Spirit. Indeed, it did happen that by means of those Kydon's brothers supporting Barlaam and Akindinos, this was the cause for translating the books of this Dr. Aquinas into the Greek language. They were thinking that after they had introduced a talented ally from the wisdom of this doctor, Thomas, that they might persuade all others concerning these matters. Facing these matters, these translators also held up the Roman Church with respect, that it took the first place on these questions and, at that, in the manner of the sentential judgment through Thomas Aquinas, unaware of the fact that many of the magistri, Franciscans and Herveus Natalis, O.P., among Latins, had determined for themselves on this problem rather harmoniously with sacred Gregory of Thessalonica and the whole of our Church. It would not be just to despise their number, since they are most wise and cast their lot on the side of our Church, insofar as, on these matters, these doctors magisterially determined precisely these particular matters. Argument 3. Class 1. Thomistic distinction. Thomas was also considering each instance falling under the genus distinction of reason as rather unreal. Adrenestiran. A. There was either the distinction from concepts, ekton logon, rationis, ratiosonantis, B, or the distinction from the nature of the thing, ex re natura, ek testo pragmatos physios, not merely of reason, for example, substance and accident. Definition of Class 1, cf. Supra, A. This means that there was not only a distinction of reason, tu logu, that is, of the conceptual, tes epinoias, whether understood in abstracto, elekrinos, or in concreto, sustalmenos, which is understood by two terms, orois, but that these terms, or abstract concepts, were produced, pepoimenoi, by virtue of the soul, and by no distinct item in the thing itself is it distinguished. Practical example of Class 1, cf. Supra, A. The following would not have been simple, apheles. So as for the mind to believe the divine essence and its energy are two items. The mind divides, diaeron, and composes Socrates according to its intrinsic power. It composes some such kind of proposition, namely, Socrates is Socrates. Yet, in such way, the mind does not know an essential distinction, ousiode diakrisen. Class 2, Thomistic distinction. Also, there is a distinctio maior, iskouroteran, other than this previous class of distinction. Yes, indeed, all these former distinctions are beyond the real distinction, pragmatiken. Thomas was used to calling all these real distinctions pragmatikas, cf. Supra, B, being accustomed thusly to put under the category of real distinction, pragmatiken, all of these so-called real distinctions of merons, class BDD, Meronist scotistic distinctions. That is, these aforementioned and so-called real distinctions were manifestly of a lesser, ilato, and comparatively unreal difference, adranesteron diaphoron. We, Thomists, call all of these the distinction of reason, diaphora tu logu. These greater are distinctions, cf. our Supra, B, that caused Strepomenes division to be made, chorizestai, between Thomistic, real distinction, B1, 2, subsistent res, and Thomistic, real distinction, B, 82, 2 individuals, and Thomistic, real distinction, B3, 2 wholes, between either two separables or two potencies powers. However, they, viz. Scotists, speak rather of the essential definition, to tai enai, in abstracted or formal concepts, en toi logos. Argument 4. Speculation on the contrary to fact possibility that Aquinas could have accepted a real distinction. If there would have been a division of major distinctions, iskouroterai, indeed, these would have been called precisely differences of reason, logon diaphorai. These definitely are distinguished, diachronomenon, from one another, but as such through the nature, phusai, of the terms, whenever they also are in the res following the ratiocination of the soul, rather than certainly least of all after being produced, popoimenois, by the soul in two terms, the latter of which distinction would have been precisely named a distinction of reason. 28. Anyone would have easily went into a fit of sweating from the writings of Thomas on account of the difference of concepts, ton logon, diaphoron. Whether or not Thomas was not ignorant about the formal distinction, eidekin diaphoron, distinctio formalis a parte rei, stemming from the nature of thing, and on account of these minor distinctions and those distinctions lesser than that, namely, those which come in the class behind the real distinction which Thomas diffusely called distinctions of reason. Purpose of chapters 93, 94. Yet, now this Thomas is not our concern, but rather consideration of what is serviceable from such a question concerning of our Holy Church and the blessed Gregory of Thessalonica, for the sake of whom we have serviceably published this very discourse at hand regarding these theological matters. Whence, let the matter along the lines of Thomas, as much as in the investigation that follows, be given leave to others to consider in what way one estimates the sentences of the former, Thomas, or to the sentence of the other teachers, or, in respect this, the very truth of Gregory. Now, Thomas is not exceedingly important for us, that we should plead on behalf of all his artifices, even if otherwise that marvelous man is important for us and was the glory of the prior age, and even now still seems to be such. Metaphysical logic against Barlaam and Akindanos. This was the only provocation of those Barlaamites and Akindanists, those reckless men who had waged war against their own mother the Church, as befits provocation, inasmuch as their brain, from so much pride, was possessed of such rattling. For how would one otherwise be ignorant that there is a distinction of the divine essence and energy, and that it exists in following the ratiocination of the soul, just as too this divine essence and its goodness in themselves are outside of our soul? For who does not know, after the soul has been stripped away, granted also that the mind is created, that also the essence of God and the energy thereof, and the difference among these two is a difference? But who unaware that neither actus essendi, to einai, nor the act of existence, to uparkain, nor the act of projecting, to proegestai, is opposed to the divine energy, whether ad intra or ad extra? Who does not know that if one's mind happens pick up all these aforesaid items, the soul predicates these items of the divine energy attribute, only as far as the fact that God's being good in God is not due to one kind of Aristotelian category. Said in another way, who does not know, the fact is that goodness itself is in God absolutely, apollelemenos, but not with reference to something else, anaphorikos, outside of God, as well as wisdom and mind and such kinds of things, just as there is in God begetting, genesis, and emanation, probole, and paternity, and likewise sonship. 29. Yet, all these realities, even items not yet contemplated in this treatise, nonetheless exist and will exist in this way in a nature and virtue of res, toi pramasi. On one hand, there is no definition, orismos, of a future, whole, nor of some partial limit, orismu meros, for both of these would not be specifically one, an ide, and an essential definition by human reason, logo to t and inai. Now, how would it be according to reason, katepinoion, and how could they, Barlamites Akindinists, judge that the items are distinguished in virtue of individual notions, toi logoi, which predicate the essential definition and that exist in the nature of the thing, onte tu pragmatos phusei. Yet, their alarm at composition also used to disturb these people, for it is not true that, as they say, because the attributes really are attributed to God, then they are not also attributed according to our thought alone. Consequently, there is a composition of these attributes, and this is composition in God from these items. Now, from this, the properties that are besought are absent with respect to that act of making some kind of composition, and from this fact composition is absent as well. Having supposed the fact that the divine goodness and wisdom and science are in the divine res, in the mode that they exist in God, none of these properties is possible of being discovered among the aforementioned, such that no composition at all follows out of necessity, and this is clear from the aforesaid explanation. Apology on behalf of Palamas. Now, Sacred Gregory had all these points within the range of his vision. He both followed once and for all the sentence, confirming that of our mother, the Church, and judgment of the ancient columns of doctors. He was accustomed to say that the divine essence and the divine energy are really distinguished. Pragmatikos diakrinestai. Point 30. He was not used to saying that res, pragmata are perfections, teleiotetas, or energies in God according to the things contracted, closely ordered cogitation, enoien. Just as we assert that the divine hypostases are res pragmata, he used to say that these hypostases are aliquid rei, ti to pragmatos, and in re, and tu pragmati. And he said that the whole bespeaks res, pragmata, as realia, or real non-subsistent entities, pragmatica, rather than res pragmata, but according to another mode, tropon, thinking that these are in the nature of the thing, on te phusei tu pragmatos, and according to the mode, modus concipiendi, of the soul. He did not take up and hold the distinction by reason alone, epinoia mone, so that it also follow from this that these items exist by means of a concept, epinoia, being that they are not in the very least the divine perfections, as those around Akindinos and Barlam nonsensically were blathering. On which account Palamas was saying that pragmatikos is with the end of removing what is by reason, logo, and according to a concept, katepinoion. But he was distinguishing these same attributes by means of concepts, toi logos, which were making known what is essential, tu ti enai, and manifesting this from the nature of the thing itself, apotes tu pragmatos husios. Now, these things suffice for now, which are said with difficulty as on the run and somewhat simply, as these items would be obvious to many. We will sink deeper into this question, if God wills, in a special treatise on these matters, and as much as is necessary, we shall retrace our steps on this very matter, just as shall be inspired for us at that time, but now it is necessary to examine the rest of sections of Armandus's treatise before us.